It's having another think.
Looking positive though.
It is.
It tends to arrive on Facebook before it tells you it's arrived.
Yes. Okay, there we go.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Welcome to everybody on Facebook who's joining us this afternoon. I'm Benedicte Simcox. I'm Operations Lead for Family Voice Surrey, and I'm thrilled to be welcoming Tom Moore and Susan Harris from Surrey County Council today, who are going to tell us all about the development of the all-age autism strategy for Surrey. I wonder whether, Tom and Susan, it might be a nice way to start by first introducing who you are, and then I will disappear and let you do the presentation. And then I think we're going to try and come back towards the end and answer any questions that people have got. Susan?
Wonderful. Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Harris. I'm the Principal Educational Psychologist and the Autism Strategy Lead for Children's.
And hi, I'm Tom Moore, and I'm Commissioning Manager in Surrey County Council Adult Social Care, and I lead for autism there in development of the strategy.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think, Tom, you've got the presentation to share, haven't you?
Yeah.
So I will mute myself and listen.
Okay. Thanks very much, Benedicte. So I just wanted to say before we start really getting into it, a couple of things about the language that we're using here. So it's an all-age autism strategy. And when we say autism, we do mean the whole autism spectrum. So it includes people who are autistic, who have a learning disability as well, and also those who don't have a learning disability as well. And people may have other names for conditions that they have that are on the autism spectrum. And the intention is to cover all of them. And the other bit about the language is around people first or identity first language. Now, we've asked people, autistic people in Surrey, whether they would prefer to be called autistic people or people with autism. And most people prefer to be called autistic people rather than people with autism. And that reflects the situation nationally. I think there's research where showing that autistic people prefer that language. So that's what we're using throughout. It's not everybody's favorite way of referring to autistic people. So if it's not your favorite way, I'm sorry, we're not able to please everyone with this, but we're trying to make this a person-centered strategy that's focused on what people are telling us about what we should be doing. Susan, do you want to go through?
So these are our hopes for this session. We want to introduce to you, if you're not already involved, and provide a progress update for the Surrey All-Age Autism Strategy. Share with you some of the emerging themes from our initial analysis of the feedback, and obviously invite feedback and further comment. It's really critical that we have the views from the widest possible audience. So whether you are an autistic person, a parent carer, or a professional, we really want your views and your input in this, because engagement in the consultation itself and ongoing after that is going to be critical to the success of the strategy, both in the development and implementation phases.
Okay, so I was just going to say a few words about the context of this. And I suppose it's based on an ambition to develop and expand and grow an autism-friendly approach across the county, so and across the whole system, I suppose, within the county. So across education, health, social care, also the voluntary sector, the wider community, criminal justice system, the world of work. So to go really, really broad within Surrey. And it's important to focus on autism. I think as autism is becoming better and better recognised, it's very clear that we need to focus on autism. So it's the single biggest group of people who have education, health and care plans. It's a priority. It's been identified as a priority part of the population for our Health and Wellbeing Board, which oversees health and social care within Surrey. And we already have an autism strategy in the world of adults, and it's been something that we've been required to do. The Autism Act, which came in over 10 years ago, came with some guidance and a national strategy, which said that we should develop an autism strategy to cover the adult world in each local area. So we've had one in Surrey for quite a long time. The most recent one we've had runs out this year. It's joint with learning disability, but it does cover autism, whether or not people have a learning disability. But in the discussions about how we take that forward, people are keen to have a strategy that's just around autism, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And it also makes a lot of sense to join up with children's services and to make it a strategy that's about the whole lifespan. And that also fits with the national agenda, where government have said that the next round of the autism strategy, when that comes out, will not just be an adult national strategy, it'll be a full lifespan national strategy. I don't know, did you want to add anything to that context, Susan?
No, I don't think so. I think it's clear, isn't it, that the purpose of the strategy is to make it clear to the whole system what our joint ambitions around autism are, and as you say, through the whole lifespan.
Yeah. Thanks. So we've been working on this for a little while now, and you may be aware, I hope you saw and got a chance to respond to an online consultation that we ran, which closed sort of towards the middle end of last month. Now that didn't arrive out of thin air. That was there was quite a lot of work went into designing that questionnaire, and so questions were co-produced. So that means we had a lot of conversations with autistic people themselves, with family carers of children, family carers of adults, and developed. I mean, we had some ideas about the questions we wanted to ask. We actually completely rewrote them in the light of what people told us about what they would want in the consultation. And one of the issues was it was difficult to please everybody, because different groups of people wanted different things from the consultation. So for different respondents, we had different sets of questions, if you like. So professionals who are coming in would get one set of questions, family carers would get one set of questions, autistic people themselves would get one set of questions. What's come out of that is a very rich set of data. So we've got there were a lot of places within the consultation where we allowed people free text to write what they felt about situations and what would have made the situations better. And I think we've got some really important responses in there. And we're working with London South Bank University to analyse that. And London South Bank University, so it's Professor Nicola Martin who's leading on that work from their side, and they've got really great depth of expertise there in terms of autism and in terms of how inclusion can work for autistic people across the whole lifespan. So we had 1,165 responses, which is huge in my book, and certainly a lot more than I was expecting. We worked quite hard to get the consultation out as widely as we could, but we've got a really, really positive, strong response. So the numbers break down there. So 756 family members, I think 718 in my notes were parent carers. Over 100 autistic people, which is great. Quite a lot of professionals working to support autistic people. People in the other category tended to be wider family or sort of people who came across autistic people through work but weren't directly supporting them, if you like. So we had some of the themes that are starting to come out. We haven't completed the analysis yet, but got some ideas. Susan, do you want to?
Yep. So we looked at the last question in the survey, which asked what were the top 3 things that were most important that people wanted to change or felt needed to change as a priority. And I think they're not surprising. These were the overarching emerging themes. And I think, you know, the first one, cultural and behavioural shifts, whilst there were many comments about the positive experiences that parents and carers had, this was very clearly not a view shared by everyone. A lot of parent carers mentioned that the processes they had to engage with were adversarial, that they didn't feel listened to, where parent carers felt blamed for their child's difficulties and that they had to fight for support. In terms of services, there was feedback to suggest that services are experienced as fragmented and that support is not coordinated or joined up. And this was linked back to the importance of services being commissioned differently so that we can work together in an efficient and effective way in meeting the needs of people with autism. The whole system was described in many different ways, but as difficult to understand and difficult to navigate. When you're in a different or new situation, it's not easy to find out what you need to do, where you can get support. And the information and guidance is hard to find and actually quite hard to understand when you actually get to the right place. Awareness and training, there was feedback throughout the whole consultation around this and across all agencies, all services and communities. There was a feeling that there needed to be a level of awareness raising for some and some specific training for frontline workers. Particular reference was made to the spectrum, the fact that not all autistic people present in the same way, but are occasionally treated or addressed as a homogenous group, and actually that training needs to take into account understanding the different ways in which maybe girls with autism might present or those with high functioning autism, and so on. Support for the whole family was another overarching theme. Support needs to be focused around the family and not just the person with autism. Particular things noted were the need for respite, for access to support for families in the holidays, the need for financial support in some cases, and an example given that in order for a child to access an after-school club so that parents can work, the child required additional support, and this is a burden on the families, and also support for siblings whose life might be impacted upon. Those are quite clear themes that were really permeated every set of questions. So if you were looking at education or transitions or community, these permeated all of the other areas. So I think that's me carrying on here. So then we looked at some of the specific themes that were emerging and trying to align those to the sort of preparation for adulthood work. Health, unsurprisingly, the length of time taken from referral to diagnosis was a key issue, with reported wait times of up to sort of 18 months or 2 years, and I'm sure possibly some longer than that. And that was essential, obviously, for a number of reasons, having the diagnosis. But there were quite a lot of comments about the fact that there was no additional support forthcoming post-diagnosis. And quotes around, I just want to know so I can move on with my life and have a better understanding of myself and why I find things difficult, was a particular quote in the adult sector. Wait is too long, but people did report positive experiences of the process once it had happened, and particularly, again, comments from adults about then being able to take control, be able to be taken seriously, to be able to ask for support, and to give other people tips. Many respondents felt that support needed to be available both pre and post diagnosis, so it shouldn't be dependent on receiving a diagnosis, and that information about how to access the support should be readily available. Tom, did you want to talk about the GP part?
Yeah, fine. So it was very noticeably mixed, and in the autistic adults in particular, it was really noticeably mixed responses, where for some people their GP practice was the one, the quote was, the one truly autism friendly organisation in the community that I've found. That was a quote that one said. But other people said that their GPs and people working in the practices really didn't understand autism or neurodiversity, and that was a real problem to them, and training would really help. That's probably the biggest single thing that came out around GPs. But very markedly, there were a few comments that were in the middle. There were people who found it great or really not good.
So in terms of support for good mental health, this was mentioned a number of times across both children and adults, as was accessing timely crisis support, with a view that this appears to be inconsistent across the county. It might depend on where you live. There was also reference to CAMHS staff not understanding the different presentations of children, young people with autism and other comorbid diagnoses, such as pathological demand avoidance, lack of understanding perhaps about the presentation in girls again. And Tom, adults?
Yeah, I mean, in the adult world, there were a number of reports in there of people being discharged from mental health services, either pending an assessment, an autism diagnostic assessment, or once they have an assessment once they have a diagnosis of autism, being discharged from mental health services on that basis. And a quote was around what would help. Somebody said, some understanding that an autistic person can have mental health problems too. Don't refuse to help with a mental health problem just because someone is autistic. You can have both problems. So I think that there's something, it was quite a strong message, I think, for adult mental health services there. And again, there was, one of the key things was a better understanding of autism, so a training need. to gain, and recognition of the different things that services could do to make more accessible and to be more inclusive for autistic people. So we've got quite a list of things. So, and in terms of the challenges from services, so again, several people raised services saying they don't deal with autism. Services and services discharging people, and difficulties with reception staff and other members of practices and staff. So not solely with the people, the clinicians who are supporting people, but actually that the understanding of autism needs to go across the whole organisation.
Yeah, it makes me think of one of the quotes I read in the consultation. It was just imagine that you're a teenager and you've been told that you need help for your mental health, and then the service says, but we can't do anything about it for 8 months. You know, imagine how that makes you feel. And that's, yeah, it's just stayed with me, that one.
Yes.
So, preparation for adulthood, we've covered a number of things here. There was a significant number of respondents who felt that there needed to be improvements in the educational support available for children and young people, both with and without statutory education, health and care plans. It shouldn't matter, well, I say it shouldn't matter whether you get a plan, but I realise that's a little contentious. You should have the help when you need it. The support should be there. And there was a feeling that in schools, this again was fragmented. And if you didn't have a plan, you might not be getting the support that you need. The school's ethos and understanding of autism and training needs were highlighted. And also was the fact that parents wanted schools to recognise and build on their children's strengths and not see their child as a diagnosis or a difficulty. There were some quite specific comments about the development needs for school special educational needs coordinators as well, and perhaps that there should be a specific training for those practitioners. Again, in schools, there was a query about the level and availability of therapeutic support. Occupational health was mentioned, speech and language therapists were mentioned, and also the frequency of changes in staff being quite difficult in terms of establishing relationships, and also that practitioner's understanding of the individual's pupils' needs. Again, feedback also focused on educational provision, a lack of provision for girls. I think we have one girls' school in the southeast of the county. The need for a maintained residential special school so that children weren't having to live so far away from their homes. And also more provision for those older children, 16 plus, with high functioning autism. That was also identified as a gap in provision. Some people articulated the need for a curriculum which taught all learners the skills they needed to live as independently as possible, and not just those who might be in a special school and be described as having more severe learning difficulties. And in particular, those with high functioning autism were mentioned here, the need for that, the curriculum to prepare them for adulthood. So additionally, Tom, I think this is going to move on to you. The need for clearer supported pathways to employment was mentioned, as long as awareness raising and training for employers.
Yeah. And so from our respondents who were adults on the autism spectrum, more than half of them had found jobs, but many did report difficulties even where they had found work. But in terms of what you're saying, Susan, about pathways and ways, you know, what helped, supported internships, got good feedback, and also there's an adult service called Assist, run by National Autistic Society, quite a small service, low-level support in the community, and again got very good feedback. What people talked about in terms of what would have helped, what would have made a difference, people talked about earlier diagnosis. So again, I think that we had a number of the adults who'd responded, hadn't been diagnosed until they were adults, some well into adulthood. And I think for them, understanding what their issues might be and how to ask for help, how to frame asking for help would have been really useful for them. But people did talk about it as a bit of a double-edged issue in terms to employers. So we had some people had, well, one person particularly had a very negative experience of getting a negative response from an employer once they'd disclosed their diagnosis, whereas others had much more positive responses, which again I think feeds into what we were talking about raising awareness in the wider community and employers. There's also, people also talked about the Department of Work and Pension Services, so there's job centres and who also oversee benefits applications and so on. And again, we had some quite good feedback for Department of Work and Pensions when people had disclosed their diagnosis and got a good response. But we also had quite a lot of people saying Department of Work and Pensions need to understand autism better, and that there were some negative experiences there as well, particularly around benefits and the stress of the application process for benefits. Sorry. The next part we look at.
Yes.
Susan.
Yep, I'm happy to start with this one. So under community inclusion, awareness and training, as before, is a theme entirely running through here. Social opportunities and leisure activities were mentioned for all ages, right from preschool children through. The availability was patchy and offers were limited, with some people expressing concern that those with autism don't necessarily want to be always just with other people with autism. So the range of offer needs to be appropriate. Preparation for adulthood also featured highly here again, with the need for real opportunities for children and young people to develop skills for independence. One comment that I had noted, which Tom pointed out again was a bit of that double-edged sword, was the one person had written about the need to create spaces in the community which benefit autistic people but aren't labelled as such. And yet conversely, there's the view from autistic adults saying they value spaces that sort of do have that label and where they can meet other autistic people. And I think it takes us back to that sort of starting point that not every autistic person is different. Every autistic child and young person is different. And that needs to be accommodated in our planning and our strategy.
Yeah, and I think there's something that's come up quite frequently in the Adults Autism Partnership Board as an issue. It has been the accessibility of the kind of general public spaces and leisure facilities and so on. So where you have supermarkets now sometimes do an autism hour or a quiet hour or something like that. But leisure centres are somewhat behind them, I think, in that. And I think some of the leisure centres in particular, public spaces generally, but leisure centres in particular can be in a sensory way quite difficult to access for a lot of autistic. So there's work to be done there, I think.
Yeah.
Around independent living, this was again much more about responses from autistic adults themselves, and I think people wanted, again, something of a theme here with a lot of things you've said, Susan, already, clear information and guidance, and to support people to understand what options might be available to them. And I think some of the challenges that people found were people who, not everybody had used the housing departments in the districts and boroughs, but people who had found them really difficult to navigate. And again, we've got the issue of training and whether people in those teams do understand autism. But then also, if people are renting elsewhere, just private landlords understanding autism. I suppose there were issues raised as well around the design of housing and sensory challenges that people might have. So in particular, noise and soundproofing came up, and there was one thing about the housing departments understanding that that's a real issue. It's a disability access issue. It's not just somebody would prefer somewhere quieter. But I think there are also issues about people generally being housed in environments that aren't ideal, and whether there were adaptations could be made available for people, and those would be, again, I think those sort of sensory adaptations might be the types of things that would really help. Supported living came up, and I think so for people who are eligible for funded services, supported living is one of the ways people can get support. So they have a tenancy perhaps, and support coming into their home to support them in whatever way is assessed that they need that support. Now, that's much more widely available for people with a learning disability, including people with a learning disability and autism, but less so for autistic people who don't have a learning disability. And I think people wanted to see more variety of options there. And that was kind of what came out of the consultation in a nutshell, in a brief overview.
Shall we just talk about the next steps?
Yeah, yes.
So we're in the process, as Tom said earlier, of analysing the responses with LSBU. What we want to do once we've done that is check out with you and others about whether we've understood them correctly. So we really wanted to have this is what you've said, this is what we think we need to do and focus on. These will be the work streams moving forward, but we want to check that we've got that right. So we will be organising a number of workshops in I think it's the 1st and 2nd weeks in December. We can confirm when we've got the dates, when we will present fuller findings and our proposals in the form of hopefully the draft strategy moving forward, because we don't want to have misunderstood or miss something very significant. So we want to come back and check that out with you. So that's where we're up to, with the hopes of having the strategy fully developed for sign off in February next year. Is that right, Tom? Have I got those dates right?
Yes, that's right.
Good.
I hope so, yes. Okay, I don't know how this works now in terms of questions.
I think
Shall I
Benedict will rescue
Shall I come
us,
back
will
in?
you?
I will
Yeah,
rescue
great.
you very happily. I'll certainly do my best. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Just for the people who are looking, I thought it was also important to say that as Family Voice, we've been involved in all this process really from the start, haven't we? So
Yeah.
it's
Absolutely.
quite interesting for me. And this particular, so all the other presentations, I've looked at the presentations and I've learnt loads, and I've been able to come at questions from a completely fresh page, whereas here I've got a little bit of having sat in meetings with both of you. And one of the things I think that it's important, and I've got a privilege, I suppose, in being able to say that when you talked about those questions being co-produced, they absolutely were, weren't they? And not only Family Voice, but the National Autistic Society are helping. And as you said, Tom, there were a number of from feedback, some of those questions were really completely rewritten.
Yes.
And my understanding was that particularly the group of adults were quite clear. And in one of the things that, I live with autistic people, and one of the things that I really treasure about living with autistic people is their ability to be very transparent and clear about what they want. At times there's much less of the kind of game playing that many of us do, especially in our professional lives. So I think, it's maybe a nice opportunity here to say that actually, we're listening to Surrey County Council officers, but it's nice for me to be able to say, yeah, it's true, I was there. I suppose, so I've got a number of questions that I am going to put to you, if that's okay. Sorry, I'm just checking that I've got things coming in. The first question that I had was, as a parents, when we notice, or school notices that there's something a little bit different about a child, sometimes we get put on this neurodevelopmental pathway, but it often comes across as ASD/ADHD. And my understanding is very much that autism and ADHD are not the same thing, but there are overlaps. I suppose because in the children's world, they're often lumped in one group. Is this strategy relevant to those with ADHD, or is it very separate? And how do we manage that overlap? Because I suppose as the parent of an ADHD child, I might be listening to all of this thinking, yes, but what about my child? And at the same time, if my child has autism, I'd be thinking, well, how does that work out? And I wondered if those conversations had come up in this.
They have in adults' world. I mean, shall I go first, Susan?
Yeah.
There was we had some discussion around this on the adult side. I mean, the strategy, the way that we're framing it and the way that we're doing it is around autism, and people who have ADHD, of course, can be autistic as well. And so but if somebody has ADHD and is not autistic, it's not the strategy won't directly be addressing them. Hopefully some of the improvements and the sort of clarity and the understanding that we're hoping to generate will also benefit people with ADHD. I did have a very interesting discussion with a clinician as part of the diagnostic service, which in the adult side, there's Surrey and Borders run a neurodevelopmental team which does diagnosis for adults who don't have a learning disability, and they also support adults with ADHD. The view there was it would be really useful to make this a neurodevelopmental strategy. However, I think we're working within a system that's where we've got some momentum behind getting an autism strategy through. I think perhaps the next iteration of this strategy, it will be interesting to talk about, widening it out to include other neurodiverse conditions. I think at this stage, my personal feeling is we could have lost some of the focus here and potentially some of the buy-in from partner organisations who we really want to make significant changes as quickly as we can. So
I think it's important to know that there's no intent of tripping up or anything. I think it's just, we know so for example, where I used to live, we had a local group of special needs parents that they wanted to set up a local support group for all SEND families. And a couple of weeks in, we had quite a lot of parents saying, but I don't feel that I can go because my child isn't autistic. And so I think it's helpful, as much as it's really important, I think, the work that we're doing to make our community more autism friendly. In doing that, we may just, I suppose, need to just have this awareness that others may feel a sense of exclusion. As I say, ADHD is so often kind of lumped together with ASD by the system. It felt helpful just to air it rather than let it simmer as a potential thing.
Yes, we don't want any strategy to be at the exclusion of any other groups. Absolutely not. So I think that's really important to raise. I think within the strategy, we will pick up on that, the sort of differential diagnosis, the comorbidity, but we also need to make sure that the work we're doing with the strategy links to other SEND transformation work in Surrey. For example, the recommissioning of the CAMS work, the neurodevelopmental pathways. So we've talked quite a bit in here about diagnosis, length of wait, level of support available. So we do need to make sure that we're crossing into and working with those other areas where this will impact.
This kind of lines up beautifully with one of the questions that we got, is how does a strategy translate into changed life experience? How do we go from, all of these lovely thinkings
really
to actually...
Really good question, because which I can't give you an answer to, but I can tell you a little bit about our thinking, Benedicte. So that's the question we've been wrestling with, is about how will we know we've made a difference? How do we know? How do we know it's going to make any difference to anyone? Are parents going to say in 10 years' time, I had to fight to get the support I needed, it was adversarial, etc. So part of our focus has been on the absolute data side of things. What do we need to know in terms of prevalence, demand, etc. But the other part that we need to capture is that lived experience. And that's harder to do, I think. And I think that's where we have to have more conversations. And we were talking about having one work stream, perhaps, that was really focusing on that. Mm-hmm. So how did we collect that sort of softer, but probably of paramount importance, evidence?
Absolutely. I've just had a couple of questions come in. One of them says,
Benedicte.
Yes,
Sorry. Can I just come back on that one in terms
Definitely,
of,
yes.
There is something about how we hear, like you're saying, Susan, how we hear from people, whether it's made a difference to them or not. I think there's also something in any strategy about what's the implementation of this strategy.
Yeah.
To me, I'm really keen to see that once we have a strategy and it's there, that there are, you mentioned work streams, Susan.
Yeah.
We need to be identifying work streams. Within those work streams, we need smart objectives. So we need objectives that are monitored, and we need to be, so me and you need to be held to account for
Absolutely.
the people leading those work streams need to be held to account to deliver change. And so if we're talking about, it came up so many times that this part of the system, that part of the system needs to be better trained. Okay, well, what are we doing about that? How many people have been trained? Okay, so we can measure how many people have been trained, and then we get to the point where you were talking about, Susan. Well, how do we then know that actually did make any difference.
Yeah.
So one of those things would be, what is the training offer going to be, and who is it going to be open to? And as you say, then you can say, right, we've trained this number of people. What's the difference in people's life?
Yeah.
People's experience. Yeah. Was it any use actually doing that piece of?
Yeah.
You know, I think we hope it will be, but you know, we need to see that it happens, as well as see what how people then, you know, how their experience changes.
Thank you. So I suppose one of the question, is it a question or is it I suppose comments almost, and I imagine that they'll resonate with what you've heard in the consultation. We've got here saying the difficulty in the process of diagnosis and the delay is the first hurdle most of us as parents face. On top of that, the lack of training and awareness from GPs to SENCO make it a continuing challenge, which I think is resonating what you were saying that you've heard in the consultation. Another parent says it would be useful if mainstream schools had a regular external audit of the effectiveness of SEND provision, akin to inspections by Ofsted. I wonder, Susan, you might know, I seem to remember that recently there's been some shift in Ofsted so that they are now looking at SEND, but I don't quite know where we stand.
I'm not sure whether it would necessarily address that. One of the things actually we didn't mention is that alongside the strategy, we're trying to identify immediate pieces of work that need to happen. And one of those is about autism-friendly schools and what training we need to put into schools, what support, and then sort of how we measure that. So we've been looking at a few different models. I think at the moment, the one that tends to be used most widely in Surrey is the one from the Autism Education Trust. But actually that expectation that all schools will be autism-friendly schools is not something we should have to rely on the strategy to achieve. We can start that work now.
That's good to hear. Can I carry on with more questions? Thank you.
Must be Tom's turn next.
I suppose it's a kind of general thing. I'm really struck by the fact that you got so many answers to the consultation, which was brilliant, and I'm kind of proud of us as parent carers that we really came through. I wanted to ask you, who is analysing this and how are they doing it? Is it a question of just reading and kind of collating themes? Are they using nice fancy algorithms? What's the background of the people who are analysing all of this? Is it just Surrey? You mentioned London South Bank University. Kind of what's that looking like?
Yeah, I think it's probably something between the two of those. You said, is it just reading and or is it algorithms? And I think there's a process of tagging responses and trying to be able to draw out themes in a systematic way from themes from people's responses, and it is quite challenging because obviously in free text, in the written information, it's there's a lot of information there. You know, we've got over 1,000 responses and a lot of questions. So there is a kind of formalized way of going at it. The people who are leading from the South Bank side are very used to that sort of quantitative and qualitative analysis. So in terms of that side of things, they're leading on that. In terms of talking about what that means in a Surrey context, I think that we're leading on that side of it, and hopefully between us we will come out with a picture that makes sense. But as you said, Susan, when we hold these events, we can check whether we've got something that does actually make sense to people.
Great, thank you. I'm going to jump a little bit, if that's okay, because I'm kind of taking questions as they're coming in, so we're going all over the place. A question for Tom, please. Does Surrey have any plans to provide specialised supported living provision for young people on the more severe end of the autistic spectrum?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's always the language. People can mean different things by the severe end of the autistic spectrum, but I think, yes, we have been working for a number of years with provider organisations to develop and put in place supported living for people with autism and complex needs. Mostly, I mean, it started off initially very much around people with a learning disability and autism, and people for whom their behaviour may be a really significant concern. But we are so as adult social care, we have to respond to the needs of anyone who is eligible for our support under the Care Act, and that can include people from all different places in the autism spectrum. So, you know, we have some people who wouldn't be defined as having a learning disability, but who people might define as having severe autism or very severe autism, and some of the people with the highest needs that we support fall into that category. And so, yes, we are trying to make sure that we have a range of provision that can meet the whole population's needs. And
that's good to hear.
That's not new work as part of the strategy, but I hope that the strategy will support, you know, once we get it there, it will support that work to continue.
Lovely, thank you. I've been nudged by for time, so I'm going to have, I've got a couple, I think one really easy one and one that you're going to hate me asking, so I'm really sorry about the second one. The first is, if I've been told that my child has ASD traits, but I don't have a diagnosis. Does this strategy apply to myself and my child?
Yes.
Fantastic. That was the easy one. That's really good to know. The possibly much more tricky question is there resource that has been kind of earmarked to implement any changes that are highlighted by the strategy?
No, that's easy.
No.
But I think there is something. I mean, as I say, we've had this in adult services, and we've had quite a lot of success in developing, you know, the earlier question, developing particularly supported living services for people with significant complex needs. And where that works in terms of how that works in terms of resourcing is that it's in general more cost effective to get things right for people than to get things wrong. Deal with the aftermath of getting things wrong. So, as well as being the outcome that any of us want from working in this sector, or from having a family member who might need that support, it's also more cost effective to do things that way. So
great, thank you.
So you know, I think it's not that there's no challenge with that. We're working in an incredibly challenging environment in terms of the resources that are available for services, for support in this country. At the moment, it's even before COVID, it was unbelievably challenging. And so
COVID isn't helping, is it?
I've worked in this line of work for a very, very, very long time, and it's always been, you know, it's always felt that resources were tight, but it's got tighter and tighter, and at the moment, it is really very, very challenging. So I don't want to say, oh, we'll have the resources, but resources for anything that we want to do. But I think that the challenge is to be able to, and that's where our work streams come in. Part of the work stream's job will be to provide a business case that will show, well, this will have this impact, and that will have, you know, the effect on our resources. So that's why we should fund doing it.
Yeah,
Not
I
only
think that feels like a really nice place to end, I think, because as you say, it's about knowing what direction is going to be best for people. And we do know, don't we? And one of the reasons that the Parent Carer Forum World is in place is we were able to identify that if you listen to families, actually the support that they're asking for is usually much more cost effective. Thank you both so much for your time, for your presentation, for the courage to, come in here without knowing what was going to land on you. We really look forward to hearing more about those workshops in December, and certainly we at Family Voice will be making sure that we promote that and we're involved in it. Thank you so much. And I think I can let Lisa click the end